The first step for installing this anchor roller was to make up a block out of some teak blanks. I glued them with epoxy, dimensioned it roughly to fit the width of the anchor platform or the anchor roller. And then I cut one end off square so I'd have a nice clean end so that when I laid this out on deck, I had a good starting point. After that, I laid out the roller, held it in place with some lines, and as you see here, I'm marking the inside edge with tape just to give me the correct distance from that stem plate that I want. So I have this anchor roller and the anchor that's going to go on it, this 25-pound CQR. And right now I've got it pinned through the hole for storage, which is an ideal situation if we can do it. The roller itself can move back and forth. So it'd be nice to have the anchor a little closer to the bow. But the roller in this position is as far aft as it can go without interfering with the boat. You can see right in here. And if I move it over anymore, the clearance here gets really tight. Right now that's workable for getting the headstay attached and the jib tack and whatever is there. And there's clearance for the hawse pipe, clearance for the cleat, clearance for the starboard chock. So this is fairly ideal. If we pulled the pin, the roller, I could move the whole thing forward and the roller would come further aft. And then maybe the anchor could come in a little closer. And if I move this too much further forward, I'm going to lose any place to bolt it. As it is, it's fairly minimal. I mean, there's enough. The edge of it's way up here. We're going to cut an angled piece to fit in around the tow rail. But I can't go forward too much, and I have to make sure that there's room inside for these bolts to have a good secure place to mount as well, and I have not looked inside as of this moment. So here's the chain locker end of this operation, and as chain lockers go, this isn't bad. It's fairly open, plenty of room up above there. We'll get up closer in a minute. So here we are up in the action. There's the hawse pipe and the cleat. So we're going to be mounting the anchor roller somewhere right in this neck of the woods. It's nice and flat, nice and clean, no obstructions, so I think we should be in good shape for a backing plate and access for the bolts that we need to secure that roller. There's no advantage to moving this further outboard towards me. I'd have to move this, and it doesn't really gain anything useful. And then I lose even more ability to bolt it through the deck. And of course there's going to be a block under here. That's the teak block that I made. It'll fit in here. Let's adjust a few things and see where we end up. Here I've removed the pin, and that no longer lines up with the hole because I've let the anchor pull the roller to its furthest aft position. And this is where it needs to be for that roller to still have clearance to spin against the boat, right in there. And it didn't gain us a lot as far as bringing this aft. So I think I'm going to go back to where this was pinned. Here's a view from underneath in that position that I've chosen. I'm going to tighten up the through bolt on that roller so it can't slide anymore now that we've picked the position. And that looks pretty good. Be nice if there was a way for it to come aft more, the whole anchor, but given all the issues at hand here, there just isn't. We can keep wanting stuff, but you know, there are always limitations on a boat and up at the stem. And overall, this is a pretty good fit for a good, useful roller. It's going to keep that anchor away from the hull. And it looks decent. It's not overly bulky. And especially if the mooring line is run from the port side, that anchor tip is not going to interfere with it. Now that I was happy with the basic position of the anchor roller and how the anchor fit on it, I made a couple extra reference marks Here I'm just marking underneath the roller where it overlaps the toe rail so I can easily duplicate its position every time, because I'll be taking this on and off a number of times as I build the little platform for it to sit on. I started that with a plywood template, cut to the same width as the support block, and then over various steps I aligned it, made some reference marks, and started to shape it to fit the actual space. I started with an angle at the forward end to match the toe rail. Wasn't quite right, so the next thing I did was scribe the toe rail along the edge. And then I marked where it overlapped that hawse pipe, because I'm going to need to cut that out a little bit so that it'll fit flat on the deck. And that's a modification I'll have to make later to the block as well. Now I'm scribing the edge. I have that compass set at, I think, 1 inch. So I just drew that line, and I can easily duplicate that down on the bench. So I can recut that, which is what I did. And now I'm testing the fit again. Making sure that the roller spins freely whenever I have it in position to make sure it's in the right spot. There's still some alignment and detail work to finish up on that template. You can see I shortened it by taking off that outer edge. So that means the curve I cut for the hawse pipe was in the wrong place. So I did that again. Now it fits flat on the deck and fits pretty well against that toe rail. So it's starting to get dialed in now towards the shape of the final block. Every time I put that roller on, I aligned it to those marks that I made. And then I can sight down over it, make sure it's aligned with where the roller is, my template. And that makes sure that it's in the right place, so when I do any extra measurements, I have everything laid out the way I want. Now I'm transferring those template measurements to a teak block, cut off the angle, and then it's roughly shaped, so I can start to fit that in place. And I haven't relieved the bottom side where it overlaps the anchor hawse pipe. So I'm going to mark that exactly where it lays so that I can modify that. The green tape on deck and up on the stem plate is just for alignment. That helps me line things up. There I've made the marks for where that hawse pipe is, and I'm just going to relieve it with the sander. Actually took a couple times, a little extra sanding to get that to fit. As you can see, I've got it level on the deck. There's a slight rock in it, but that'll get taken care of later. And it fits over that hawse pipe. And as you can see here, I've relieved it nicely over that hawse pipe. It's got a nice rounded edge, and that allows it to clear that flange. And the hawse pipe itself still works just fine. It's easy to access the top. There's no interference. So now I'm using a straight edge off the 2 bearing points on the toe rail, which is that stem plate and the forward chock. And I'm just marking the actual height on the teak block, because the teak block right now is too tall. It needs to be trimmed down so that it fits the same height as the toe rail. I intentionally made it too large so that I could make sure it would fit. I trimmed that down on the table saw and a couple of fits and starts, and I got it to fit the roller as you see here. The only cut that hasn't been made now is the actual length at the aft end. That end is still rough. Once I really dial in the position, I'll figure out that cut and make it. So after quite a bit of cutting and fitting and trial and error and working in the tight space that I have. This is where I've ended up with the block and the anchor roller. Got it supported up there at the forward end with a little line just so I could let go of it. It's obviously not completely where it needs to go, but that's holding it for demonstration purposes. Still got to cut this off at that line there. I left some space here so the water can flow through. Here at the forward end of the roller, I've got it so it just clears the bow pulpit support here. Got about an inch clearance next to that stem plate. So that's enough to work with. And that also keeps it clear of the hose pipe. Had to relieve the bottom of the wood to go around that. So this is a tight fit, but it all is going to work. The chock is still workable. The lead to the cleat isn't great, but that can be dealt with. The other side, of course, is clear. But I think we're just about there. Just the right little reveal on the edge. Here's a look at the block with the anchor roller removed. See, I've got a little passage just forward of it. And that follows down along the inside of the toe rail on this side. So it'll be able to flush debris out of there. But this is what it looks like without the roller. I had to slightly shape this forward end because the height of this plate and the height of this chock, both of which the roller sits on, this just needed to be tapered down a little. And I've got one more cut to make for length back here. And that'll give ample room around this. I'll show you that once that's done. And then around the other side, around the hose pipe, I had to relieve the bottom of the teak blank to go over the flange. But this thing does operate just fine. So that's good. And the cleat here will have plenty of clearance once I cut this to that second line. The line that's right in the middle is actually the line. So this is the block I ended up with after a morning's work. This is the final shape and contour of this block. It's been sanded. It's ready for varnish before I install it. Again, I've got the water gap here to keep debris out of there. And because it's just kind of where it lines up anyway. Plenty of room back here at this end for clearance around that cleat. Get a line around, no interference there. No interference with the hose pipe. Plenty of clearance there. We've got, I don't have the roller in here right now, but that green tape, the roller sits on this side of it. So we've got an inch of clearance to the stem plate. And this nice gap up here at the forward end, again, to allow water to channel right through. With the roller in place, this is the approximate final setup. Obviously, I'll make sure everything is just so before final installation. But again, you can see the clearance here. That roller is a little bit off kilter. It's just placed and it wants to move because of the way I have it suspended. But when it's finally installed, it'll line up with that tape. So there's plenty of clearance in there. You can get a finger in there. You can get a cotter pin in. Put the pin in from the port side. You might even get it in from this side, depending how long it is. But that was important to make sure there was room there. The roller spins freely. I've got this bolt now secured so that the roller doesn't slide up and down this way. This is the correct position to allow that anchor to be able to be pinned here. I don't know why I try words like this when I'm narrating. Minimally obtrusive, I would say. It's a good size anchor and a good size roller, but it's kind of what's necessary, and this will store that anchor really well. Now that I had that block dialed in, I could mark the bottom of the anchor roller with its profile so that I could lay out some bolt holes. Because the anchor roller comes without any bolt holes because every installation is different. So I drilled out all those holes in a two-step process, first with a 1/4 inch bit, and then I came back and used a 3/8 inch bit to finish them off. It'll be secured with 5 3/8 bolts. And I cleaned up the edges of the cut holes with a countersink just to give them a slight chamfer, remove the burrs. I used brand new bits for this. It's the best way to get through tough stainless steel. Now I took that block, and here I've had the opportunity to put 1 coat of varnish on it so far. I'm just marking the deck so that I can put some tape on there, and that tape will help me not only align the block in the future when it's time for installation, but it'll also be there to protect the deck from sealant when I do the final installation. So that's why I'm taking the time to do it well. Gives a good idea of the footprint that we're working with. Couldn't see my lines on the deck, so I had to try and manipulate my flashlight in my phone there to see these lines. Once I finished that tape layout, I carefully aligned the block to the tape so that it was in the right position. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the anchor roller on top so that I can mark those holes. Get it lined up really well. The block was moving around, so I taped it in place to hold it, and then I made those marks for the 5 bolt holes. It occurred to me kind of late in the process that there might be a roller furler on this boat, and I was concerned about clearance here. So I looked at a photo that the owner had sent me a while back that showed the boat on a mooring. And indeed, there's a furler on here. So I asked him for some additional pictures, which he fortunately had. He was able to send me a few great pictures showing the furler drum. And with those pictures, I decided I needed to mock this all up again and see how we're looking. So I've got this thing in position, secured with the anchor on it. I don't have the block in there, but that's okay. That's good enough for what I need. And the best reference we have from the photos is that bolt right here coming through the pulpit to give us a real kind of sense of where we are. And I've made a mark where the roller, the top of the roller frame is, and also the high point of the anchor, which is back here. And it's a few inches aft, but this is the highest point that we have to deal with, roughly right there. And from the side, you can see this high point is, let's take a look, it's 3 inches aft of the pulpit. And it looks like the owner's got 4-inch link plates on the bottom of that furler. Doing this without the actual thing is definitely a challenge. This is the key place we're worried about. At this height, we're worried about the distance from that stem plate to the anchor. My gut says everything clears, but it's not a ton of room. I've mounted the mock-up I made of the furler here on the headstay chain plate. So this thing represents the drum, and this represents the extension below it that covers the turnbuckle, which is 3 inches in diameter. approximately 3 inches tall. So that's 3 inches, 7 inches from the pin to the bottom of this, 3 inches from here to here. So we can use this to mock that up and see what this is going to look like. I've approximated this angle that you can see from the ghost of the clevis pin, clevis rather. So it's approximating the angle of the headstay, close enough. And then from the pin to the bottom of this drum is 7 inches. And from the bottom of the drum to the bottom of this disc, which is 3 inches in diameter, is also 3 inches. And that represents the skeleton of the shape that's there. In the real thing, this is a solid cylinder all the way up. But all we need to know is that it'll clear. And I've approximated the drum at 9 inches based on a drawing I found. I don't know that it's the exact model. But if we clear with a 9-inch drum, if the actual drum is a little smaller, we're just better off. So now I've got the anchor and the anchor roller set up next to my little mock-up. And it looks pretty good. You can see that the bottom of that cylinder, represented by the black tape, is well clear of the roller and even more clear of the anchor. The anchor height is what I was most worried about. And a view from the forward end, we're at our 1-inch mark, roughly. This thing's just set in place. But there's no interference anywhere. You can see how that disc clears it well. It's well above the anchor roller frame itself. And there's plenty of room for error here, even if my mock-up is not sufficient. The drum itself, whatever diameter it is fine. And that cylinder is fine below. I'm not sure what we call that. I've been calling it a turnbuckle cover. I really don't see any issues here that would prevent us from proceeding. Things looked close enough that it was definitely worth a little effort to make sure, because that would be an annoying problem to discover at the time of rigging. So I think we're looking good. It's not even close from this mock-up. And that's what I was hoping to see. My gut says this drum is too big. I took a drawing of what I think is a similar or the same model furler. But I'm not sure. They have different sizes. I'm not sure. This one might be for the next size up. It's a 9-inch drum. That looks big. I don't think the drum's that big. So if anything, this is going to be better. There's no way the drum's bigger than that. So I'm feeling good about this. Definitely worth this effort. You saw how much time and careful effort I put into making my beautiful template. No expense spared there. So I think we're a go on this. So I've got one hole drilled all the way through here. So I had to locate it, see how thick the deck was. So I made an educated guess on the bolt length, not having drilled through the deck yet. And that looks like it's going to be pretty good by the time I get my backing plate on there, which I have right here. Sorry, moving stuff around. One hand on the camera. This is my backing plate. It's not going to fit right now because I need to relieve it where those bolts come through, right there. But I can put one hole in, and that's the perfect length for a washer and a nut. So that worked out well. I am going to have to modify this a little because of those bolts right there. So I'll get the rest of these bolt holes drilled and see what I need to do to this. And I'll make those changes. For the rest right at the moment, I'm just going to mark it with this and the 3/8 bit. And then I'll come back and drill these all out a little larger for epoxy. Holes are all marked with the 3/8 inch bit, just a little bit into the teak. And then I used this 5/8 inch twist bit to enlarge the holes slightly to give me a place where that 5/8 Forstner bit that I'm using now could actually fit, because otherwise the point on that bit would wander all over the place. So that's why I did this in 3 steps, like you saw. And I used that Forstner bit to drill through the teak in this case, and then the top fiberglass skin of the deck, and then through the deck core, which is underneath that, and finally bottoming out on the inside fiberglass skin. That's the layer that's inside the boat. And that leaves me a flat-bottomed hole ready to accept epoxy, and it's not going to let the epoxy leak out. So here I've drilled all 5 holes out to 5/8. And I drilled through the teak, through the fiberglass, through the core, which appeared to be plywood. And then I bottomed the bit out on the inner fiberglass skin that you can see there. So I can fill these holes with epoxy and they won't leak out. And the fiberglass skin on the inside remains intact, all except this first hole that I had to drill all the way through. So that's next. I taped around all those holes just to protect the deck from epoxy, even though this area is going to be completely covered by the anchor roller. And then I went and mixed up an epoxy batch, my standard batch for filling holes like this, which is high density filler for strength and Cabosil to get the texture just right. And I started by wetting out the holes all around the inside with a little brush, and then I put some epoxy in with the brush and kind of dabbed it up and down to get the air out, as if I were settling concrete or something. And then I finished up with a putty knife, filled the holes the rest of the way, dabbing them a few times just to get the air out, and eventually working up to a nice flat tooled finish off each hole. And that tape just helped protect the deck so I didn't make more of a mess than I had to. You can see now I'm scraping it up nice and flat and even. Once that was done, I pulled up the tape, leaving just the epoxy on the deck. And the tape came up pretty well here. A couple little spots where I didn't have some tape, and there's a couple dabs of epoxy on there. So I'll come back and clean that up with a rag and some acetone. Again, probably more than I needed to do here since it's all covered, but I don't like to make a mess. Here's the end result, filling these with epoxy. All the holes are filled. A couple places where the teak split out a little bit, so I've got a little epoxy in there. But we'll let that cure overnight, and next time we'll bed this thing down and finish it. The next day, with that epoxy cured, I started out by aligning the block and the anchor roller with 4 of the 5 bolts just through the roller and into the wood. And then with the 5th hole, I drilled all the way through the deck so that I could get 1 bolt all the way in. and pin it there so that I could drill the rest. I thought this would be the easiest way because these things wanted to move around a little bit. So with one installed, I decided to do one more, which would really pin it. So I pulled another one out, drilled that hole all the way through the deck. I was able to drill through the anchor roller. The drill actually had clearance on the inside on these first two holes. I did find later that the chuck would interfere with the sides of the anchor roller a little bit. So now I'll install that second bolt. That'll really pin things in place so I can pull out the last three and drill those. Found that the roller assembly was actually in the way, so once I drilled a little bit, I pulled the block off, and then I finished up the holes just through the deck like this. Then I cleaned up and got ready to get on with the installation. As a final step, I used this countersink bit to mill a little bit of a countersink on all these holes. Just ensures there's room for extra sealant right there where those are going to go through the boat. Now it was time to make a mess. I did a little more taping around the area just for some protection on the deck. And then I got to work putting this black sealant in. Normally I wouldn't use black, but on this boat with the black seams in the deck and the black caulk used elsewhere, this seemed like the right choice. So I used it here, put on a ton of sealant on the deck around all the holes. I always use way more than I think I need because I want to make sure there's going to be lots of squeeze out. So once I had the deck covered, I put the block on, carefully positioned and sighting through the holes to make sure it was more or less where it belonged. And then I gooped up the area where the roller was going to sit, including the stem plate, the forward corner of that chock, and all over the block itself. I aligned the roller, started all the bolts through the holes to minimize the amount of goop that ended up on the threads. And I went below decks and tightened up the bolts from below. Put the backing plate on, tightened them all up. You can see how it's pulling the sealant out as I tighten that up, which is just what I want to see. I could do this below decks by myself because I used a set of vice grips to hold the exposed end of the threads below the nut, and I used a ratcheting box end wrench on the nuts, so that made it possible to keep the bolt from spinning while also tightening the nuts down. So here's the underside: nuts, lock washers, fender washers, and the teak backing plate that I made. Everything's tightened up here. Looks good. That looks good. That's what I like to see. Tons and tons of squeeze out everywhere. Lots and lots. Everywhere I put it. I put some on the stem plate and this chock as well because the anchor roller does rest on those two areas. And I just wanted it to have some adhesive. Now for the best part, the cleanup. Started with a squeegee, pulled out all the excess sealant that I could with that, Just wipe it on a rag. Throw the rag overboard when it gets too gunky. So this way I get most of the excess off before I start using the rag and solvent to clean up the rest. I started on the starboard side where I had the staging set up. Did everything I could from there, including cleaning out that slot between the tow rail and the anchor platform as best that I could. After a while, I'd cleaned up everything I could from this side, and I didn't want to have to reach over it and get all gunky, so I moved the ladder over to the port side and cleaned up that side from there. Cleanup's just a matter of patience, lots of paint thinner, lots of clean rags, and hopefully some tape that you put down first to keep things clean. Especially on this boat with that teak deck, I didn't want to get the sealant on the deck because it would never come out. So I made sure to use extra tape everywhere. Here's the port side, all cleaned up. It's a lot of cleanup. Got a lot of squeeze out. I was not shy with the sealant. Here's the roller from the starboard side. Installation complete. Cleaned up. I don't know if it'll show it. There's still the gap through there for water and airflow. Cleaned that out pretty well. And the stain on the deck there is just paint thinner from cleaning up. But this looks pretty good. Installation wasn't bad. A lot of cleanup, but that's to be expected.